we're going to talk about modes, scales, keys, and harmony in this lecture. The notes that a composer uses, the discrete set of notes that a composer uses to create a composition, will determine much of its feel. And those notes, when defined within an octave, are called the mode of that particular piece. It could be major, minor, any other possible variants, many of them. And when you line them up in order, you call them a scale. Think of a scale as being like a mathematical set. Those are the ingredients that you can use when you're composing. Let me talk a little bit about how those are created. You all know what a piano looks like. You know that it has white keys and black keys. The shortest possible distance between two keys is called a half step. You put two half steps together, you have a whole step. Modes are created by specific combinations of half steps and whole steps. Now, you can also create a scale using only half steps. That's called a chromatic scale. And composers will throw that into compositions for flair. Or maybe to transition from one key to another. Sometimes composers use only whole steps and create a whole tone scale. It has a very open feel. It could be used for like ghost music or space music. Here's an example where the Impressionist composer Debussy used it to create music describing sails on a lake, sails from a sailboat. It's called voile. If you travel up only on the black keys of the piano, you are using what's called a pentatonic scale. Penta from 5, meaning the 5 notes of that scale. If that sounds Asian to you, that's because that's where that scale is frequently used. Now, in the 20th century, there was some wild experimentation with modes, and composers decided that they wanted a type of composition that didn't have a central key or home base or feel to it. So they created a system called serialism or tone row, in which each note in the octave was supposed to have the same importance as all the rest. So they would create a design within their composition for the 12 notes that they wanted to use, and they made sure that they didn't use one note any more than any other note to give them all equal importance, and also to completely get rid of a tonal center. So this was atonal music. Here is a 20th century atonal piece using a tone row. But for the rest of music history, from the Renaissance on, melodies center around one note that feels like home base. How annoying is that? I mean, you have to resolve it, because you know that that note feels like home. Once you establish the home base of your key, then that note is called the tonic, and it is considered the first note of a set of notes that make up the mode. When musicians look to establish which key they are in, they first look at which note feels like home base. Then they look and see, are there any notes that are consistently altered? Are they playing B flat more than B and A flat more than A, etc., etc.? And that is what determines the key signature of the piece. Now here is a picture of a key signature, and this for example, tells us that in this particular piece, every B, E, and A are to be played using B flat, E flat, and A flat instead of the white keys, the keys immediately to the left. That tells me, through music theory, that we are either in the key of E flat major or C minor, and we'll pick out which one of those are true by figuring out which note is home base Does it land on the E flats all the time, or does it land on Cs? Now, once we determine the key of the piece, musicians have a whole set of expectations for what sort of chords they will encounter for helping them with sight reading, or if they want to, what chords they want to use to embellish a composition. Often composers will change keys in the middle of a composition to add interest or excitement. This is called modulation. The early Greeks used 7 modes for their compositions, and according to their doctrine of ethos, they believed that each mode had a specific effect on the psyche. So whenever they needed to rouse a warlike sentiment, they used Dorian mode. When they were singing love songs, they used Lydian mode. Now, you're used to hearing Mary Had a Little Lamb in major mode. Well, here's Mary in minor mode. Now here's Mary in Dorian mode. Mary has many different modes. When you keep changing the modes, it does make a difference. From the beginning of the Baroque era through to today, Western music has, with only a handful of exceptions, settled into using 2 modes, major and minor. While we're always cautioned not to give you preconceptions on the effect of the psyche of these 2 modes, it is no secret. Pop songs of unrequited love are written in minor. Happy songs are written in major. Sometimes you'll hear compositions that will first present a melody in major, and then just for interesting contrast, they will give it to you in minor. Here, for example, is the middle section of a Chopin waltz in A minor, where he does just that. First you hear the melody in major, and then you hear it in minor. Now, music in the Middle Ages and Renaissance did not yet settle into these 2 modes. They used all of the available Greek modes, the church modes, which we came to call them. And because the system of harmonies and chord progressions that helped to give strength to the tonic weren't developed until the early Baroque, even the feel of the tonic was fairly faint. A discussion about harmony. The core of Western harmony that has been used for centuries is called the triad, which is a 3-note chord created by playing every other note of the scale. So here are the first 5 notes of the C scale. And now I'm going to play every other note. And that has given me the chord that is based on the first note of the C scale, the C chord. Which is, by the way, any chord that is based on the first note of the scale is the most used, important chord harmonically in that scale. So it's built on the tonic note, and it's called the tonic chord. The second most important chord is called the dominant chord, and that's placed on the 5th note of the scale. Okay, so now we have built a triad on these chords, and as we move through the eras, I will mention in later eras like Romanticism and Impressionism that they worked with expanded chords. And we can continue this every other note business to make a 7th chord, a 9th chord, an 11th chord, etc., etc. It gives it a different feel, a very interesting feel. So once we know what notes are in the triad that we want, you can play as many of those particular notes, all the C's, Z's, and G's as you want, and you can play them anywhere in any order on the piano that you want. And this is the springboard for creative composition. For example, here is the beginning of the Beethoven Pathetique Sonata, built on a C minor chord, which instead of C, E, G, is C, E flat, and G. And so we're going to take those notes and arrange them differently and double them and make them into a big chord. And now we can move on and talk about music history.